elections in Bengal have never been non-violent. They've never been without very, very violent clashes. But there's something absolutely crazy about what we've seen through the day today. In the last few hours alone, 12 people are now reported dead. That number would be much higher when we look at the run-up to the moment of polling. How do you look at what's happened?
Well, Barkha, 25 people have died in the entire violence before and after before the polling date.
Yeah.
And you've seen the really bizarre scenes of violence, of destruction of ballot papers, etc. Now, the interesting point about this is that none of this was really unanticipated. It was almost inevitable, and there's a sort of eerie inevitability about what took place. Partly because you're talking about central forces. The point is, central forces were not deployed. The state election commissioner, who appears to be an extremely partisan person and extremely callous in his approach to the entire show, organized the elections without taking into account the ground realities of what would happen. Or he was willfully unmindful of them. Now, every panchayat election is bitterly fought, as you know. And the reason why it's bitterly fought in West Bengal in particular, over the past 15 years or so, has been because the panchayats have turned out to be a very major agency of corruption. And that is why those who are in power in panchayats are loath to give up anything because their livelihood depends on it. So they cling on to what they can, and they do it through muscle power, money power, through any other power which is possible. Then there is in West Bengal a trend, a very anti-democratic trend, which is you have elections by a show of might. In other words, you stuff the ballot boxes, you ensure that actual legitimate voters don't get a chance to vote. So when you know this tradition is happening, when you know during the general election there was 8-phase election, not the general election, the Vidhan Sabha election.
The assembly election, yes.
Election, there was an 8-phase election, which was reasonably good and well conducted. When you know all this, why did you have a single phase election and tell everyone and delay the entry of central forces for as long as possible and finally ensure that their deployment was a farce? So there's a lot of questions they've got to answer.
Why do you say the deployment of the central forces is a farce? I asked you this because the Trinamool Congress today in its official statements has accused the BJP of misusing these very central forces.
The central forces, you see, when the question of central forces, the State Election Commission said we don't want any central forces. Then, when pressed by the High Court, they said, okay, we'll deploy 20 companies of central forces, one per district. Then, when that was turned out to be a farce, the High Court said, you do exactly what was done in 2013 and ask for 822 companies of central forces. So they did it. But the time it took and they went on appeal to the Supreme Court, they lost every appeal, and by the time it was too late to get the central forces. And once the central forces came, they were not adequately deployed. So what's the point in having a central forces in the district headquarters? And the central forces are totally dependent on the logistical support of the local police force. They wouldn't know where to go. I mean, that's understandable. So, not in most of the booths, and you can find out throughout the day, the reports will come in. You'll find that in most places, the central forces were not there, and ill-equipped, sometimes very partisan police force was there, and they just stepped back when the remotest sign of trouble began. So, I believe this election, in many ways, was a macabre farce.
The BJP has approached the election commission or is approaching the election commission
Which election commission?
So obviously,
Well, there are two. You see, because the panchayat elections are conducted
Yes.
by the State Election Commission by the terms of the 73rd Amendment of the Constitution. The Central Election Commission in Delhi has no
Yes.
jurisdiction over this one.
So you
So
are
they are
effectively saying, you are saying the state election commissioner has been biased.
worse than biased. I mean, I think bias is too mild a term to express him. The terms which have been used against him is that he's a domesticated animal. But I don't want to use those terms, but I think that
What do you mean domesticated animal? You mean
basically
he's
he
he's
does everything at the command of the chief minister. The
so
man
you
took
mean
over.
you mean he's like you are
He's
alleging
like a
that he
poodle.
is.
He's like a poodle.
Yes.
Yes, he took over. Within 24 hours of taking over, he announced the elections. Most people were taken by surprise because there was no preparation for it. Not even the BDOs didn't even know where the ballots would be filled in. There was a huge commotion during the filing of nominations. A lot of people couldn't file their nominations, and you knew that that was the early warning signs were there, and you still didn't act on it. And he goes to office at 10 o'clock in the morning and he leaves office at 5 o'clock in the evening. Good Babu, who thinks that he's protected by the constitution, nothing can happen to him. Therefore, he can violate the spirit of democracy. He can take democracy for a ride and make the third tier of government into an entire farce.
So what then are the options before the BJP? You call the election a macabre farce. You call the state election commissioner a poodle of the chief minister Mamata Banerjee. There has been gory violence. The Trinamool Congress would argue and is arguing
Yes.
that Suvendu Adhikari, the leader of the opposition in the state, made inflammatory speeches, literally urged people to take ballot boxes and chuck them into the pond. Let me read out the Trinamool Congress tweet to you: from demanding the deployment of central forces who stood idly by as our party workers were ravaged, to brazenly threatening to urge central government to keep Bengal's funds blocked, to inciting violence, Suvendu has shown his utmost contempt for the rule of law with his inflammatory speeches and so on.
Undoubtedly, from a distance, some of those speeches would look inflammatory, and I don't doubt it. What I think is very important to understand is that what is the resistance, local resistance possible when you find that your booth has been taken over by the Trinamool Congress and they've already stamped the ballot. There's your paper ballots, mind you, because they insisted on paper ballots. They've stamped everything, stuffed the ballot boxes with them, and there's nothing left for the legitimate voters to do. So these were signs of protest. In a large number of cases, the destruction of ballot boxes, and I don't approve of them, but they were signs of protest by people. Maybe the means of protest could have been far more sophisticated. But you've got to understand how the dynamics work in Bengal. It's a very, very brutalized, very, very brutal society, very polarized society. And mind you, most of these, most of the resistance to the Trinamool took place, very interestingly, in the Muslim areas. Most of the deaths took place in the district of Murshidabad, which is
And
a
most of those who have died are Muslim.
exactly most of them who died. So this was something which was alarming because Trinamool Congress and Mamata Banerjee has taken the Muslims as a captive vote bank, having got more than 90% of their support of that community's support during the Vidhan Sabha elections. And now, if she finds that the whole thing is falling apart for different reasons, she's alarmed. And I think you've got to see it in terms of the political dynamics also. Now, what are the options for you? I think it's very sad, but again, here we are seeing when the executive abdicates its role, people have to turn to the judiciary. Traditionally, the judiciary should not play any role in an election. And that's the convention which has been followed in during general elections or Vidhan Sabha elections. But here is an aberration because of the dereliction of duty by the state election commissioner. So I have a feeling that people will go to court and there'll be a tussle between the judiciary and the executive.
And go to court and ask for what?
I asked for the cancellation of the elections.
So you're saying that you believe that there is enough ground to ask for this particular polling to be cancelled.
Yes, I believe so.